I decided to sponsor a bill that excludes the death penalty for individuals that are severely mentally ill, because I understood as a physician that severe mental illness is a biological, pathological disease of the brain like any other medical illness.
Persons with severe mental illness don't have the true rational ability to form the decision-making that a person without the mental illness has. So by setting out in the law that a person with severe mental illness is not subject to the death penalty, you can still have responsibility for the crime, you can still have life without parole, but you don't give them that penalty that's reserved for the worst of the worst.
With severe mental illness, their ability to think things through, control their impulses, weigh their options when they're deciding what course of action to take is impaired. I think as a society, we can't put people with severe mental illness to suffer the ultimate punishment.
We ought not to put to death people who are not as able to control themselves and their behavior because they've got a severe mental illness. It's just not right.
If someone has a diagnosable mental illness, whether treatment has been successful or unsuccessful, they should be excluded from the death penalty.
The Supreme Court ruled a number of years ago that people who have intellectual disabilities, and they called it mental retardation at the time, could not be put to death because they didn't understand what they did was wrong because of their disability. Likewise, several years later, the Supreme Court ruled that juveniles under the age of 18 and even children could not be put to death because of their youth and inexperience and immaturity, couldn't understand what they did. And the people, the individuals with severe mental illness really are in that same category. So they should not be put to death for the same reasons.
People with mental illness, because it's so difficult for them to navigate the legal system, they take a longer time to get through every single stage of the criminal justice process.
They're arrested more often than people without mental illness. They serve 30% longer. All of these statistics result in somebody who committed the exact same crime might serve 10 days. Somebody with a mental illness will serve 30 days.
They have more behavioral problems, more symptoms. They end up in restraint and seclusion. It's very stressful, and the symptoms can increase.
So many of these people with mental illness, the first time they actually get diagnosed and treated is they make the portal through the jail. And that's where somebody finally says, let's get you into treatment.
Regarding the insanity plea, so hard to show. You've got to show that you didn't understand the wrongfulness of your actions. It's a high bar to meet. It is rarely used, and even more rarely is it successful. In the 1% of cases where it's raised, 25% of those cases is successful. Not guilty by reason of insanity is not going to keep people with severe mental illnesses from being executed.
In the penalty phase, jurors more often than not and prosecutors turn the mitigation of mental illness into an aggravating factor. Instead of looking at the fact that their mental illness was behind what they did, they created into something that they should punish them worse for. It just is not effective in the mitigation phase because of how it's used by prosecutors and how it's perceived by juries.
The jury winds up thinking they're even more dangerous because this is somebody who can't control themselves because of their mental illness. Let's solve that by executing them. Put on evidence of mental illness. It could backfire and make the jury more likely to want to see you executed. With regard to competency to stand trial, the question there is whether you understand the criminal proceedings and can assist in the preparation of the defense. That is a very low standard. And competency to stand trial doesn't answer the question of, were you impaired at the time of the offense because of mental illness? The competency to be executed. The question there is, do you know why you're being executed? So that's not going to apply in a lot of circumstances. And that also doesn't answer the question of, were you mentally ill at the time of the crime? You could be severely mentally ill and not delusional about why you're being executed, and you will be executed.
I was diagnosed some years ago with bipolar disorder. It's been a challenge. You know, there's a lot of folks out there like me that are living with a mental health condition.
Often people think that individuals with mental illness are violent. That's not true. People with mental illness are far more likely to be victimized than they are to victimize other people. People think sometimes that they're faking, that they are looking for sympathy from other people, they don't want to work, that they don't want to contribute to society.
We all know people who have some degree of mental illness, but do we all know somebody who's been schizophrenic? Do we all know someone who is delusional? Maybe not, right? And so not having that experience, that life experience, allows jurors and other people in the community to otherize people with severe mental illness.
And what people don't really understand is mental illness can flare up at any time and any moment. And sometimes people that are struggling are not able to make the rational decisions that they really need to make in their life.
So many people of all strata of society has had serious mental illnesses. This could happen to anyone. This could be our children, this could be our nephews, it could be our cousins. And when this happens, these people really don't have any control over their impulses, and they're unable to distinguish between fantasy and reality. And when they commit a very serious crime, they may need to be punished if they don't reach the standard of insanity, but they don't deserve the death penalty either.
And happening today, an activist group will push Indiana lawmakers to make exemptions for criminals that have serious mental illness. The goal is to spare mentally ill people from the death penalty. The proposed legislation will be filed today, and it aims to protect people with conditions like depression, PTSD, and traumatic brain injuries from the death penalty.
I think the reason why we have a growing bipartisan movement to eliminate the death penalty for people with severe mental illness, it's because it's the right thing not to take someone's life for committing a crime when that person at the time of that crime was significantly impaired by severe mental illness.
Do we as a society want to spend our money pushing people through the legal system and putting them to death, or spend that money on treatment, research, trying to figure out how to better care for our vulnerable individuals, help people earlier, and even put that money towards helping families and helping victims?
The American Bar Association showed that Tennessee has spent between $57 and $75 million since 1977 on the death penalty for seriously mentally ill people. And before we start on a very long, drawn-out process, let's say we're not going to put people to death that don't have the wherewithal to understand what they've done.
We need to set these standards so that persons with serious mental illness aren't subject even to the death penalty. Take it off the books, just like you took off juveniles and persons with intellectual disabilities.